All right. Hi, folks. I'm really happy to be with you today. My name is Amanda Gilbert. I am a solutions engineer at Braintrust. And I am not one of the people based in San Francisco. So I came over from Baltimore, Maryland. And yeah, really excited to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can detect hidden AI failures. And really, what I mean by that is that there are a lot of failures that you'll come across that will not come up within your tests. And the best way to capture those is truly to look within your production traces to start to capture some of those behaviors that maybe were unexpected, whether that's on the user side or it's on the agent side, to start to get an understanding of where the agent is having a hard time or falling over, or even some of the more positive things that could lead to roadmaps, some of the ways in which people are trying to engage with your agent, but it's not necessarily able to meet the needs of its users. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Uh, by a show of hands, who here is running evals today and who here is doing observability over their agents? Okay, a lot of us. So for those of us that are new, I think as we are getting into this space and starting to develop, it is quite a mind shift to shift into this world where you are dealing with very stochastic systems and you're even measuring them with stochastic judges. So we're going to talk about what this landscape kind of looks like. And how your process will change and how your operating model should change to adjust to this new world. All right, so like I mentioned, production will create failures that tests can't. And this is because offline testing does not equal what you will see once you put an agent into production. When you're offline, you're typically dealing with curated data sets that have examples that you've put together, maybe of example user interactions or potentials that you expect. You also will probably have some very rigorous ground truth expected values that you're going to be evaluating against. However, when you are moving into production, these signals that you get start to shift. They look like support tickets, they look like vague feedback from your users. Maybe you are even capturing an actual thumbs up, thumbs down, or asking your users for feedback. But you have to start mining and kind of combing across all of these signals. You can't just look in the places that you know to look, or maybe you think might be an issue. You have to start also looking at signals directly from the agent's traces and also the way that users are interacting with your agents. I think typically these hidden failures can fall into three categories. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but usually it comes down to intent mismatch, which means your user expected the agent to do X. Maybe its reasoning was correct, but it still missed the mark. And then tool breakdown is another really key area. Even potentially, sometimes your agent will get to the right answer, but it gets there the wrong way. So therefore, it's not very reliable. And you have to be able to identify when that's happening so that you can have a consistent user experience. And then finally, I would say we see a lot of policy edge loops. So agents getting stuck, having a hard time with retries, not necessarily knowing when to escalate, even sometimes operating out of their scope, coming from a good intent, but doing the wrong thing. And this can be very costly. It also can be dangerous for your business if the agent is operating outside of the scope that you want it to. So some of these hidden failures that get missed with your standard testing suite can actually lead to a very real damage to your brand. It can lead to churn. And with these systems, people have a much harder time coming back to them. If you're offering it as a supplemental tool, like maybe a chat agent or very sophisticated search, and they have a hard time using it, they will likely just go back to the patterns that they used before. So getting it right and understanding where the agent is going off course is very important. Probably the most important slide I'm going to walk you through is the operating model that you'll want to get into. So this is the part I really want you to remember if you don't remember anything else. which is that you should start operating in somewhat of a continuous loop between observing what is happening within production and then eventually being able to turn that behavior into a gate that you can use before you're shipping to production the next time. And the way that we do this is that we first observe our traces. However, manual data mining in this case can be pretty expensive. It can be expensive for you as a user if you try to do it yourself. It can also be expensive if you try to use agents to do this, asking them to comb over large amounts of data and decide where to focus. So you have to have somewhat of a strategy of clustering your traces together to start to surface patterns. And some of those patterns might be things like failures that are happening within the app, sentiments that are being surfaced, and issues that are arising. And once you've done that clustering, then you can take the information that you've gathered from your traces and bring that back offline and start to iterate over your agent. Um, and you can do this using evaluations so that you actually know with definitive quality benchmarks that you've decided on whether this is better or worse than your previous iteration. So there's a lot of process that you can start to build around here. And you get to a point where you even can gate in CI around some of these failures that you've seen. And the idea is that over time, you'll build out an evaluation suite that captures any failure that you have seen before in production, any way that your agent can go off course. So you know that if you're shipping a new version of your agent, whether or not it's regressing in any of the ways that it's failed before. For instance, Dropbox actually runs 10,000 evals each time that they ship to production, from the time they start in dev and then all the way up through staging and into prod. So this can become a very rigorous activity, and it also becomes a way that you can communicate with certainty. We are actually making things better based on what matters to us. And the last thing that I see happening before we get into the demo is that people are starting to shift from more of this manual data mining to active observability. So how can we proactively start to cluster and surface these insights instead of having to go and look for them? At scale, this is extremely important, right? When you're just shipping one product, maybe it works okay to start documenting these in Excel sheets and sharing them out between teams and gathering feedback, but that doesn't really work at scale. So you need a way to start surfacing these patterns before you know to look for them. This is also a really good way to reduce the risk of an incident while you're still moving faster. If you turn on a new version and you start to see a lot of new issues arise, you know exactly where they came from, and you can start to get this very holistic and rigorous way of evaluating your changes. And with that, I'm going to go into just a brief demo. I do want to show you a little bit about Braintrust and how we approach this problem. And like I was mentioning, there is a lot of manual data mining happening, right? There's a lot of going through exact traces. Maybe in this case, I want to look into this specific agent interaction, and I see that the agent is having some issues accessing my systems internally to process a refund. So that's one signal, right? It tells me what one agent interaction was, but it doesn't give me a good idea of where this falls in the landscape of the rest of the problems and the rest of the areas for improvement. It can also take a really long time to go through this type of data, right? These traces are not only very high in volume, but they also can be very messy and complex end to end. So there is another way to look at this. In Braintrust, we call this topics, but essentially we are clustering your traces as they come into the platform into 3 areas to start. The areas are tasks that the agent is being used for, sentiments that are being surfaced, and then issues within the application. So if I wanted to take a closer look at issues, and the interesting thing about topics, people often ask me, is this, an X, what are the X and Y axes, right? This is an embeddings map that gets created. So it's really more of a clustering algorithm. So how are these traces clustering together? What are the common failures that are arising? So in this case, you can see that I have some issues with transcript truncation, and I can even dig into each one of these and see what was that specific agent interaction. But now this data becomes classifier information that gets stored on the trace. So I can start to slice and dice my logs to look for this specific data and even create data sets from this information. So take all of the truncated issues and then put them into a data set, take it offline and start evaluating and trying to iterate upon this specific problem. All right, I think I'm almost out of time, but the last thing that I'll say is that we do have the ability as well, because it's a great place to start surfacing things like issues, tasks, and sentiments that are coming up. That's a really good place to start. However, you will probably build your own specific facets that are important to you. So you have the ability to write your own custom facets that surface insights that are important to you. So like in this case, I wrote one to find security incidents where my agent was not properly escalating the problem. But we've seen people use this in a lot of different ways, and I think that's very interesting. And at the heart of this, it's just a prompt. The prompt is what generates the facet, and then the facets generate the embeddings and eventually create this map. But it's a continuous pipeline that will evolve over time. And with that, I think the last thing that I will say, and thank you so much for coming to my talk today, is that it's very important to really start to orient around the production behavior of these agents. You have to run evals and tests before you put it into prod. But once you put it into prod, your real source of your data sets, your test cases, and then also how you're going to evaluate and how you're going to improve is found in your production traces. And they have a lot of really rich information as is before you even add additional signal on top of them. So that's my talk for today. And thank you guys so much.